The Old Testament book or the Hebrew Bible. The Old Testament books was not written again originally in English. It was not written originally in English. Almost all was written in Hebrew. And some section of that book were written in Aramaic, the Semitic tongue spoken by the Israelites, or a dialect closely related to the Hebrew. The Aramaic is a language spoken by Jesus. And the oldest complete copies of the Hebrew Bible in 19th and 10th centuries were largely the work of the Masoretes. The Masoretes are medieval Jewish scribes who added vowel symbols to the consonantal Hebrew script. So the difference between the Hebrew script, which is consonantal, the Masoretes added a vowel on this Hebrew script. So that's the work of the Masoretes. The Old Testament was translated into Greek in Alexandria about 3rd century BC. And according to the legends, there are 70 scribes working together independently, and all arrives at exactly the same translation. Imagine the 70 scribes translated the book. All of them arrives at exactly the same translation. And that translation is known as the Septuagint, the Greek word for 70 or the LXX. Septuagint was called LXX also. So the five books written by Moses, or the Torah, the books of teaching, also called Pentateuch. First, the book of Genesis. Genesis is the book of origin, the origin of the universe, the human race, and the Hebrew nation. The book of Genesis is the first book of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. Genesis ends with Israel in Egypt, ready for the coming of Moses and the Exodus. Genesis in Hebrew called Bereshit, which means in the beginning. So its names derives from the opening words in the beginning. Genesis means in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Next, the book of Exodus. This book tells us about the deliverance and the beginnings of the history of Israel on the way to Canaan under the leadership of Moses. The book of Exodus is the liberation of the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt in the 13th century BCE. The Old Testament book of the same name, Exodus. Exodus is the covenant book. It's the rules, the history, and the contract all wrapped up into one. Next, the book of Leviticus, the book of laws concerning morals, cleanliness, food, and among others. In the book of Exodus, it narrates how Moses led the Israelites in building the tabernacle with God's instruction. Here in the book of Leviticus, God tells the Israelites and their priests how to make offerings in the tabernacle and how to conduct themselves while camped around the holy tent sanctuary. So the book of Leviticus explains 5 basic themes that relate to the life of holiness: a holy God, a holy priesthood, a holy people, a holy land, and a holy Savior. Like what is written in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, for it is abomination. This verse seems to say that homosexuality is forbidden in the eyes of God. So the verse forbids male incestuous sexual relations as well as the female. Next, the book of Numbers. Numbers is the book of pilgrimage of Israel, the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. The fourth book in the Old Testament. It is called a book of Moses because it contains the story of Moses and the Israelites when they wandered throughout the wilderness before ending up at Israel, where God promised where they will settle. The name of the book comes from the 2 censuses taken of the Israel. Numbers begin at Mount Sinai, where the Israelites have received their laws and covenant from God, and God has taken up residence among them in the sanctuary. The task before them is to take possession of the promised land. Okay? So in the Hebrew Bible, this book is entitled Bemedar, or in the wilderness, after one of its opening words. Next, the book of Deuteronomy. This book is a repetition of the laws given shortly before Israel entered Canaan. So the fifth book of the Torah, translated from the Greek Septuagint, the word Deuteronomy means second law, as in Moses' retelling of God's law. The accounts in Deuteronomy occurs in Moab 40 days before the Israelites enter the promised land, or Canaan. So the purpose of the book is to lead Israel to obedience and to warn them against disobedience. The Pentateuch is often called the 5 books of Moses, or the Torah. So Pentateuch tells us the story from the creation of the world to the death of Moses and the preparation of the Israelites to enter the land of Canaan. Next, we'll go on to the historical books. From Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the book of Esther. Okay, first, the book of Joshua. This is about the record of the conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua and the division of the land among the 12 tribes. After the death of Moses, God calls on Joshua to lead the Israelites across the Jordan River and take possession of the promised land. So God guarantees victory in the military campaign and vows never to leave the Israelites as long as they obey his laws. So the book of Joshua takes forward Deuteronomy's theme of Israel as a single people worshiping Yahweh, or the Lord. In the book of Joshua, it mentions 12 leaders who judged Israel: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. Deborah is the only lady judge of Israel. The book of Ruth. This book is a beautiful pastoral story in which Ruth appears as ancestress of David and of Jesus Christ. Ruth was a biblical character, a woman who, after being widowed, remains with her husband's mother. She accompanies Naomi to Bethlehem and later marries Boaz, a descendant relative of her late father-in-law. Ruth is a symbol of abiding loyalty and devotion. First and Second Samuel introduced from this book in the opening poem was the Song of Hannah, which is the sovereignty of Yahweh, the God of Israel, the reversal of human fortunes and kingship. So these themes are played out in the stories of the three main characters, Samuel, Saul, and David. Okay. Samuel is a figure who is the narratives of the Hebrew Bible, plays a key role in the transition from the period of biblical judges to the institution of a kingdom under King Saul, and again in the transition from King Saul to King David. The next book, First and Second Kings, is the book of the early history of the kingdom of Israel and later of the divided kingdom. These two books of the Hebrew Bible, together with Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and First and Second Samuel, belong to the group of historical books, also called Deuteronomic history, written during the Babylonian exile in 550 BC of the Jews. Okay? The kings of Israel, the United Kingdom, from King Saul to King David down to King Solomon. After King Solomon, the kingdom of Israel was divided into two: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay, you see the map, the northern kingdom of Israel, the yellow one, and the southern kingdom of Judah, the pink color. The First and Second Chronicles is largely a record of the reigns of David, Solomon, and the kings of Judah up to the time of the captivity. The book of Chronicles were originally part of a larger work that included the books of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. Chronicles emphasizes the two dynastic political institution of Judea, the Davidic monarchy and the temple. It highlights the covenant that God made with David. Next historical book is the book of Ezra. This book records the return of the Jews from captivity and the rebuilding of the temple. The narrative follows a repeating pattern in which God of Israel stirs up the king of Persia to commission a Jewish leader named Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah to undertake a mission. So the leader completes his mission in the face of opposition, and success is marked by a great assembly. Ezra was living in Babylon when in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, the king sent him to Jerusalem to teach the law of God to any who did not know them. So Ezra led a large body of exiles back to Jerusalem, where he discovered that Jewish men had been marrying non-Jewish women. That resulted to Samaritans, or what we call the mestizos. The book of Nehemiah is an account of the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem and the reestablishing of the sacred ordinances. Nehemiah was a cupbearer of the king in Susa, the Persian capital. So Nehemiah left his post as cupbearer to a king in order to rebuild the great city of God. The last one of the historical book is the book of Esther. The story of Queen Esther's deliverance of the Jews from the plot of Haman and the establishment of the feast of Purim. Esther, the beautiful Jewish wife of the Persian king Ahasuerus or Xerxes I, her cousin Mordecai persuaded the king to retract an order for the general annihilation of Jews throughout the empire. So Esther was instrumental for this. And Esther means star. Next, the poetic book or the book of wisdoms. First, the book of Job, the problem of affliction showing the malice of Satan, the patience of Job, the vanity of human philosophy, the divine wisdom, and final deliverance of the sufferer. So the book of Job helps us to understand the following. Satan cannot bring financial and physical destruction upon us unless it is by God's permission. God has power over what Satan can and cannot do. The book of Psalms. This book is a collection of 150 spiritual songs, poems, and prayers used through the centuries by the churches in its devotions. So Psalm involves the praise of God for his powers and beneficence for his creation of the world. So the Psalms envision a world in which everyone and everything will praise God, and God in turn will hear their prayers and response. The book of Proverbs is a collection of moral and religious maxims and discourses on wisdom, temperance, justice, and many more. So the book of Proverbs, or the book of wisdom, writing found in the third section of the Jewish canon known as the writings or the Ketubims. God has given Solomon the wisdom to rule his people fairly. So from this book, Proverbs is actually a book of instruction on how to live a life pleasing to God and how to be more peaceful with all of mankind. It is a wonderful book for people of all ages to study how to live moral and a peaceful lives. The book of Ecclesiastes. This book is a reflection on the vanity of life and man's duties and obligations to God. Ecclesiastes stands between the Song of Solomon and Lamentations, and with them belongs to the Megillot, the 5 scrolls that are read at various festivals of the Jewish religious year. Okay? Ecclesiastes, the King Solomon, son of King David, wrote With these three books, he wrote the Proverbs, he wrote Ecclesiastes, and also the Song of Solomon. The Song of Solomon is a religious poem symbolizing the mutual love of Christ and the church. Song of Solomon, also called Song of Songs or Canticle of Canticles. This consists of the book whose author is unknown. Solomon's name is a later addition. It's a collection of love poems spoken alternately by a man and woman. So there is no coherent story in the book. Now we'll go on to the major prophets. The five major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, and Daniel. First, the book of Isaiah, the great prophet of the redemption. This book is rich in messianic prophecies, mingled with woes pronounced upon sinful nation. The superscription identifies Isaiah as the son of Amos, and his book as the vision of Isaiah concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Hosea, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the king of Judah. Isaiah was a Hebrew prophet who was believed to have lived about 700 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Also born in Jerusalem, he was said to have found his calling as a prophet when he saw a vision in the year of King Hosea's death. So Isaiah prophesied the coming of the Messiah, or Jesus Christ. The book of Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, lived from the time of Josiah to the captivity. So the main theme is about the backsliding, bondage, and restoration of the Jews. Next, the book of Lamentations, a series of dirges by Jeremiah bewailing and afflictions of Israel. The Lamentation of Jeremiah, also called the Lamentations of Jeremias, the Old Testament book belonging to the third section of the biblical canon, known as the Ketubim. The content and style argue against Jeremiah's authorship. Each of the first four chapters consists of an acrostic poems. Next prophet, the book of Ezekiel, one of the mystery books full of striking metaphors, vividly portraying the sad condition of God's people and the pathway to future exaltation and glory. Then the book of Daniel, a book of personal biography and apocalyptic visions concerning events in both secular and sacred history. The book of Daniel, also called the prophecy of Daniel. The overall theme of the book of Daniel is God's sovereignty over history. In Daniel 1, introduces the fundamental question that runs through the entire book: how God may continue to work his plans when all seems lost. That's the major prophets. Next is the minor prophets, from the book of Isaiah to the book of Malachi. First, the book of Isaiah. Hosea is a contemporary with Isaiah and Micah. Their central thought is about the apostasy of Israel, characterized as spiritual adultery. The book is filled with striking metaphors describing the sins of the people. The book of Joel, a prophet of Judah. The leading topic of the book is the national repentance and its blessings. The day of the Lord. It's the saying that says the day of the Lord, a time of divine judgment transformed into a season of blessing. The book relates nothing about Joel except his name and that of his father. So the book's central theme is a concept borrowed from the pre-exilic prophets that salvation will come to Judah and Jerusalem only when the people turn to Yahweh or to the Lord. The book of Amos, the herdsman prophet, a courageous reformer denouncing selfishness and sin. The book contains a series of 5 visions. He accurately foretold the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel, and as a prophet of doom anticipated later Old Testament prophets. The book of Amos is the first prophet to use the term the day of the Lord. And this phrase becomes important within future prophetic and apocalyptic literature. For the people of Israel, the day of the Lord is the day when God will fight against his and their enemies, and it will be a day of victory for the nation. The book of Obadiah. The leading topic of this book is about the doom of Edom and the final deliverance of Israel. It's based on a prophetic vision concerning the fall of Edom, a mountain-dwelling nation whose founding father was Esau. Obadiah describes an encounter with God, who addresses Edom's arrogance and charges them to their violent actions against their brother nation, the house of Jacob or Israel. The book of Jonah is the story of the reluctant missionary who was taught by bitter experience the lessons of obedience and the death of the divine mercy. It tells of a Hebrew prophet named Jonah, the son of Amittai, who is sent by God to prophesy the destruction of Nineveh, but tries to escape the divine mission. The book of Micah. This book gives a dark picture of the moral condition of Israel and Judah, but foretells the establishment of messianic kingdom in which righteousness shall prevail. The book of Nahum. The main theme of this book is the destruction of Nineveh. Judah is promised deliverance from Assyria. And the book of Nahum is the 7th book of the 12 minor prophets of the Hebrew Bible. It is attributed to the prophet Nahum and was probably written in Jerusalem in the 17th century BC. The book of Habakkuk, written in Chaldean period. The main theme of this book is the mysteries of providence. How can a just God allow a wicked nation to oppress Israel? The book of Zephaniah. This book is somber in tone, filled with threatening images, but ends in a vision of the future glory of Israel. The book of Haggai. Haggai is a colleague of Zechariah. He reproves the people for slackness in building the second temple, but promises a return of God's glory when the building should be completed. The book of Zechariah, the contemporary of Haggai. Zechariah helped to arouse the Jews to rebuild the temple. He had a series of 8 visions and saw the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. Among Zechariah's vision was one that describe four apocalyptic horsemen who presage God's revival of Jerusalem after its desolation during the Babylonian exile. Other visions announce the rebuilding of the temple, the world's recognition of Yahweh, Israel's God. And the last minor prophet of the prophetical books is the book of Malachi. Malachi ministered between Nehemiah's first and second term as governor of Judah. He called the people to renew their commitment to the Lord and his ways. Only then would they begin to receive blessing from him. So the book of Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, is divided into 5. The law, the history, the poetry or wisdom, major prophets or the minor prophets. The law or the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The historical books, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The book of wisdom or poetry, the book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Solomon. And then followed by the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These are the books of the Old Testament, 39 books of the Old Testament. God bless you. Thank you, everyone.